Hey everyone, today I'm going to cover a more defensive style of Oldhim. This is going to be more of a defensive passive fatigue style rather than a proactive fatigue style. And what I mean by that is that Oldhim is typically synonymous with fatigue, although that usually comes on two different schools of thought. You can have proactive fatigue where you're attacking your opponent with threats that they're forced to block with, and then they'll eventually run out of cards because you're trading, let's say, one card, for instance. So if you send Spinal Crush at your opponent, you are attacking for 9, and if your opponent decides to block for 9, they lose 3 cards, but you only lost 1 card. In the sense that 1 card hit your graveyard, 3 cards hit your opponent's graveyard. So there's a proactive style of fatigue, but then there's also a defensive style where you're going to be blocking out your opponent's cards, and eventually your opponent is going to run out of red cards. They're going to run out of threats. Eventually, they're just going to run out of cards in general. And in that sense, your life total is a very important resource. And this is a deck that's going to be leaning more into that style of Oldhim. This has been out of favor recently, mostly because of the prevalence of Icelander and Dash. These are decks that can basically beat any sort of defensive Oldhim because you're not presenting enough damage fast enough, and their endgame is going to be better than yours, normally through some kind of setup. However, this list today is going to be really hardcore fatigue in the sense that you're going to be blocking everything out. This can be a very passive fatigue style deck. But then there's also a new addition from Dynasty that may be an answer to these really bad matchups. Let's jump into the equipment slots first. So pretty standard stuff. We're not going to be running Stalagmite because we're just always going to be trying to maximize blocking every single turn. Stalagmite, while being worth a lot of value, for instance, in the Runeblade matchup, is mostly there so you can not block with cards basically, and then she'll still shut down your opponent's turn and save a lot of life. It's mostly used for a tempo play. You can only block with it twice, whereas if we're blocking with Rampart every single turn, we're going to have a much better time preserving our life total and running our opponent out of threats. Of course, Rampart is going to be paired with Crown of Seeds. These two together are very synergistic as you're able to pitch a card, use one of the resources from the card you pitched for Crown of Seeds, and then you'll have 2 left floating afterwards, which is going to let you use Rampart. And then we also have some 1-cost stuff in the deck, and if your opponent ever breaks the combat chain, you can repay the 1 into Rampart. You can use that last floating resource, and then Rampart now blocks for 2. We also have Ironhide Legs. This is just a way to use that last floating resource on a turn where you really need to. On a turn where it gives you a lot of value, you can just pitch blue, Crown of Seeds, use Rampart, and then you can use the last remaining resource to Ironhide Legs if needed. Crater Fist is here because it blocks 3. Vandal Spring Tunic is here because it's a really good utility card. You're able to Crown of Seeds just using your Tunic and getting a 5-card hand to block with if that's ever needed for your matchup. You could arguably run Tectonic Plating here just because it's 3 life versus 1 life from Tunic. Although I think the ability to use Tunic to pay for a lot of these effects in the deck, I think is probably going to just edge it out a little bit more. And we are running Winter's Wail just because it's a fantastic weapon. No reason to run anything else. And there are some instances where you are going to be attacking your opponent. You do still need to win the game in some fashion, and in some matches you are going to be trying to actually deal damage with the weapon. Also because of the disruption of the frostbite is sometimes worth the card. But jumping into the main list here, this is hardcore, right? First thing you see is 3 blizzards. This is not super, I mean, like, Blizzard is still, used, but there's going to be a lot more defensive tech in here. So we have, for instance, more earth cards. This is the main board here. So we're on, 3 Sudden, 3 Break Ground, 3 Autumn's Touch. These are just ways to earth react to your opponent, which is going to be really important because part of the thing is that the fact that you're pitching cards to defend is a lot different than actually blocking with cards, because that means that your cards are going back into your deck. And that's part of why Oldhim can passive fatigue, is that a lot of times you are pitching cards back into your deck to prevent damage rather than blocking with them and having them hit your discard pile. So while your opponent is actually consuming cards to attack you, you are not losing cards in deck to block the damage. So if you pitch Break Ground, that's a lot different than blocking with it, right? Because now it goes back in your deck. Your deck has 1 more card now. You're not just blocking it and having to hit the discard pile. So really small things like that actually do add up over the course of a long match. 3 Blizzard is just really hardcore anti-aggro tech. This is going to be good against Fi. It's going to be good against the Runeblades. Arguably, it is also good against heroes like Dash, heroes like Dromai. This is like a pretty easy way to shut down big, wide combat chains. Normally, this has been run of usually in like 1 to 2, like sometimes as a pair. I think that you can really lean into 3 on this list because you're going to be blocking so much, you're not really taking the heavy life loss from the fact it's a non-block. And this is really here to target matchups where you're going to be like trying to shut down their turns. This is a really good way to preserve life total. You can also ice react, you can also pitch it to the whale, so it's perfectly fine. Here's one example of a card that's not really used in the proactive aggro Oldhim lists that are trying to be more disruptive, which is perfectly fine here in a very defensive list. This is Brothers in Arms, so you can pitch to Crown, pitch to Rampart, and then you can use the last remaining 1 to pay to Brothers in Arms. And now this is basically a card that blocks for 4, which is above rate. So that's one example of the more defensive tech that you would find in this list compared to other Oldhim lists. Channel Link is just a staple. CNC arguably could be in here, could not be in here. I do want it in here for a few matchups and it still does block 3, so it's fine. The only consideration is the fact that it's a red, not a blue, which is relevant with things like Ice Lantern floating around. But I think that you're gonna want it for a few matchups. You're obviously gonna want it into aggro. It's really important to pressure the arsenal from a Rune Blade or Phi. They have really good targets that they're gonna be putting in there. And more importantly, oddly enough, this now is a consideration because this deck would lose to Rhinar really hard. But if you're able to target their arsenal, sometimes they're going to be setting up a really big Blood Rush Spell turn or a Barrage and Beatdown turn to get over your defenses. And this is one way to sort of threaten it. The biggest issue though is we're not on Pummel. It's the only consideration why I'm thinking about cutting the card is not having Pummel really does weaken the strength of CNC. CNC by itself is like an okay play, but you really do want Pummel with it. That's when it becomes almost sort of unfair. But it is here. We'll see if it stays in the list, but seems good for now. More blues here that just block for 3. We're going to be blocking primarily and then pitching to prevent damage, pitching to ice react to stop some more offense from our opponent, which is just another way of preserving life total. We do have 3 Fate Foreseen, 3 Sink Belows, 3 Sigil of Solace, and 3 Oasis Respite. This is a card you can also now get to include in this list since we're going to be paying for Crown and Rampart every single turn. You're now going to have a floating resource, and now you can actually use Oasis Respite, which great. It's a very good card. 1 for 5 on defense is huge. Just shuts down Rosetta Thorn, shuts down a lot of stuff, can shut down the Tekla Plasma Pistol from Dash, even if they attack multiple times in a single turn. It's a really good card. It's just not included in the current Oldhim list because they'd rather be playing more disruptive effects, but since we're on a defensive or reactive style of Oldhim, we get to run it. Glacial Footsteps is here as a game ender, same with Macho Grande. These, there are games where you are going to be using Whale every single turn, and you're eventually going to be trying to chip down your opponent down to lethal range while just blocking as much as you can. That's still going to be a common gameplay tactic with Oldhim. I mean, we're not only going to be looking to block out every single turn, although that probably will be the case a lot of the times, but sometimes it will be more valuable to be attacking with the Whale and trying to pressure your opponent's life total through some, long course of the game. And these are just good closers. Hypothermia is being split with Blizzard. So if, for the sake of your own list, if you think Hypothermia is a more valuable card for your meta, I would recommend cutting the Blizzards. These are both cards that remove Go again. The difference that Hypothermia kind of sucks in Oldhim because it takes your action point. So your opponent pretty much has perfect information to play around it. It's a lot different than Ice Lantern getting to play it in the resolution step at an instant speed. That's really brutal. You have no, prior information that's coming unless they use it, which it probably wouldn't do. But in Oldhim, cost your action point on your turn, your opponent can play around it with perfect information. Whereas Blizzard isn't instant, so it's a lot more disruptive in that regard. The niche case for both of them is that Blizzard is really good against, any of the aggro decks, especially because this turns off inherent Go again, whereas Hypothermia only shuts down conditional Go again. However, Hypothermia is really good into Dash. It shuts down their pistol, getting Go again from Induction Chamber. Very good into Dromai, shuts down the allies from getting Go again. If you're expecting more of those, I think Hypothermia can be a better card. However, if you're expecting more aggro decks like Phi, Runeblade, even Rhinar, for example, I think Blizzard is really good. So that's personally where I'm at with the card. I'm splitting it 2 and 3 because I think there's probably going to be more aggro decks than I think there's going to be Dromai and Dash in my local scene, so I'm only running 2 Hypothermia. One upside to Hypothermia is that it does block for 2, which is more relevant than you would think. Sigil of Solace is just another defensive card, pads our life total. This is something that you probably wouldn't see in any proactive Oldhim lists, as they would probably be preferring to run Pummel over things like Oasis and Sigil, but since we're fully defensive, getting to pad our life total is pretty important. We have Sotomaro is just another Earth card. We have Spinal Crush because it is a really good disruptive card, and sometimes it is more valuable to be attacking with it rather than blocking with it. Sometimes it won't be worth it to attack with it, but it still blocks 3 at the end of the day, so pretty much no reason not to include it. It's a really good disruptive card. Thunderquake is really good. It's a 3-block blue, but you can heave it if you're trying to be a little bit more proactive, whether your opponent has an off turn, they just pass, or you just naturally block out and you're left with more cards than you can use on your own turn. It's just really good to have. Winter's Bite and Winter's Grasp are just ice cards. Winter's Bite's pretty good, being played proactively, although Ice reacts all the same, pitches to Whale. Winter's Grasp is the same, but it's a 3-block, so it's another really good thing. You can just block with it freely. And now we're going to get into the sideboard, which I think where most of the spice is going to be. So the first thing you're going to see in the name of the list is Imperial Warhorn. I don't know. This is pretty much untested. No, it has a little bit of testing. That's not true. This is a good card. So this is from Dynasty. It's a legendary item. Costs 2, doesn't have go again, costs your action point, and the action also doesn't have go again, so it also costs your action point. So it seems pretty bad, right? But let's actually read through it. So pay 1, you're going to destroy it after you play this. So you play it following a turn, you can use this, end your turn. You choose any number of heroes, so you would choose your opponent. And that person's going to choose either an ally, an aura, an item, or a landmark that they control, and then they destroy that. But if you're royal, you get to choose permanents, but we're not royal because we're not running the Crown of Dominion. So you're going to pay 1, your opponent's going to choose any one of those, and then they're going to destroy it. So that seems bad, right? Normally giving your opponent agency over what they want to destroy is never worth it. Coming from previous card games, cards that have negative effects to your opponent but they get to choose are normally not very played. However, let's jump into for instance my dash list. My dash list has almost no items. I mean, I've upped the item count due to running bias update. If I'm on the Oldhim plan, I'm bringing in this sideboard package right here, bringing in the D-Reacts and bringing in the items. And I actually normally side out these because they don't block and I really need to preserve life total in the Oldhim matchup. So if I go into that matchup, I'm on a very tight list. Some people are on 3 purifiers. They're on 5 items in total. I'm on the bare minimum. I'm on 2 and 2 just for sake of sideboard. 2 and 2 is more than enough because if we go back to Oldhim here, Crown plus Rampart. So if you buff your pistol up to 4, you come in for 4 on the first one. They can Crown a Rampart, they would take 2. You would come in on the second time, they buff up Rampart to 2 since you close a combat chain so they can repay in a Rampart. So then it blocks for 2, they take 2 more damage. And then the third time, since you have 2 induction chambers, they can pay Rampart up to 3 block, and then they block 3, but they still take 1. So the reason why that's relevant is that on 2 and 2, you leak damage on every single attack. So there's never a point where Rampart is fully blocking out the pistol. So if they ever go to 1, for instance, they have to start using additional cards. The idea is that that's a board state that eventually kills Oldhim because you're leaking damage every single time. So on that, if they block with no other cards, you're leaking 5 damage every turn. But more importantly, it means that late game, it eventually does kill them. They can't fully block out without using cards, and you're not consuming cards to use the pistol. So eventually they just fatigue. Or you can boost out and kill them if you just present 1 extra threat on that turn. The thing is that if you Warhorn me on this dash list, I'm screwed. Even 1 Warhorn completely kills my entire end game. So that's a very big issue, right? If you kill 1 induction chamber, I can only shoot twice in a turn. Much easier to block that out with cards and then still returning with the Whale every single turn, or even a bigger threat if you need to. And if you kill a Purifier, then you only leak 1 damage on the first attack, you only leak 1 damage on the second attack, and on the third attack, you don't take anything, which is very big, right? So if you Earth react, you take nothing, take no damage. I'm not leaking anything. So 1 Warhorn is enough to shut down my dash list. So that's big, right? People are on Smashing Good Time as a way to beat this matchup. I think that's a lot worse in my opinion, because if you put Smashing Good Time on something, I can just Immovable. Or I can block 12, right? It would have to be a dominate effect, and even then there are ways to get around it. The best dominate target you would have would be Red Glacial. So with Red Smashing, that would be you'd also have Diffuse. So we're talking a 5-card hand that set itself up perfectly for 13. I can just Unmovable from Arsenal, block with the card, and then block with Foundry Heart, and I still get to keep all my items. So you're giving me too much agency in that respect. I don't want time for the first person. I'm just I'm doing this to explain on my end of the dash matchup. This card sucks for me. as a Dash player, but also I'm playing Oldhim nowadays. So I'm just using this to like kind of like convey the logic that like this card is very good against Dash because you remove the agency and there's no way for the Dash player to interact with it. It's very tough. So this card's good, right? And the issue is that this deck is like highly tuned to beat the aggro decks, but the problem is that it's way too slow. This is like more reminiscent of like the earlier Oldhim lists that Dash really preyed on, and Prism did too, but Prism isn't here anymore. The main reason why is because this doesn't present any damage at all. It's mostly defensive tech, so there's no way to stop this deck from getting out 4 items and just mowing you over late game, right? But if you run Warhorn, then you now have tech for a really bad matchup, and then it's a very small sideboard commitment. So then you're able to even have more, you know, defensive tech for more different styles of aggro, and this is a way to deal with that. The other issue is Icelander. So if you go to Icelander, the common thing is they're going to play Frost Hexes on you throughout the entire game. It's just a way where if you have a Frostbite at the end of your turn, the Frost Hex deals 1 arcane damage to you. So they're going to try to stack all 3. And then normally they're going to set up Insidious Chills and they're going to set up Amulets of Ice. The reason why is because they can fuse late game Ice Eternal, and Ice Eternal is going to give you Frostbites based on how much resource they pay into it. More importantly, if they have all these Insidious Chills and Amulets stacked on you, they empty your hand. So because they're going to make you pay 2 or discard. So the issue is that then you get left with no cards in hand, so you can't even clear the Frostbites. And then you'll take all the damage from the Ice Eternal, and then you'll go to your end phase, and you'll take like a bunch of damage from the Frost Hexes. That's on top of all the other things they're doing to you, but it's a really good late game that really destroys Oldhim because there's just no way to stop it, basically. But if you have Warhorn, this one's a little bit tougher because you can't choose the Frost Hex. You would ideally want to choose the Frost Hex, but even if you hit Insidious Chill or Amulet, it's still perfectly fine because these are cards they need to have in combination with Frost Hex. Frost Hex by itself is not going to be doing as much. It needs to be paired with these effects. So if you kill one of these, then you're honestly in a much better position for the matchup. And at that point, you can just actually run them out of threats by just paying for all of the arcane damage and then blocking out all of the actual physical attacks, so like Wounded Bull, Scar for a Scar, and Fighting Spirit. But you need to be able to destroy multiple things, and Warhorn's a legendary, and you can only use it once, so that's why we're on Remembrance. Remembrance is a way to shuffle it back into the deck. I'm not entirely sure what their correct number is. For Dash, I think you would want at least 1 Remembrance. You need to be able to play Warhorn twice. The reason why is because some people are on 3 Purifier. If they're on 3 Purifier and you only kill 1 Purifier, then their end game is the same as this. They can still beat you. So I think you need to be able to play it twice because you need to be able to hit 2 pistol items. If for some reason Dash starts playing 3 and 3, we'll reevaluate. But like, I don't think any Dashes are, at least not that I've seen lately. So I think just having 1 Remembrance is fine for Dash. The matchup is slow enough that you're going to see Warhorn and you're going to see Remembrance. Now into Iceland it's a little bit more difficult because you have more things you need to hit. Hitting 1 Amulet like probably is not enough. You would want to hit multiples. You ideally would want to hit multiple Frost Hexes or Insidious Shells, although it may not happen. So right now I'm experimenting 2. They pitch against Icelander for AB, so it's not the end of the world. The non-block isn't as much of a factor. In a Dash, you just pitch them to Crown and Rampart if you need to prevent pistol damage, so it's also not that much of a factor. I personally wouldn't run this card against Dromai because I think you're going to need to use your action point to always be clearing dragons, although you could maybe experiment with it, but also non-blocking is a very big issue. So I personally probably wouldn't use it against Dromai, but it's mostly here for Dash and Icelander because those are really bad matchups for defensive Oldhim, although Dromai is also a problem. So I don't think this deck is like foolproof. I don't think it's airtight. It still has some issues, but I think that this is a different take on Oldhim that's less proactive, but has tech so it doesn't automatically lose to setup decks, which I think is really important. But if we go to the rest of the sideboard here, we just have 3 pieces of AB. Heart of Ice is very good, although it's mostly going to be using this for Kano. I guess you could use it for Icelander if you want, but also having Tunic to be able to clear Frostbites is really important. But then you're sort of limited on AB against Icelander, so maybe you cut another card in the sideboard if you want to bring, for instance, like Arcane Lantern or something. Biting Gale is here for even harder anti-aggro tech. I think honestly you might even want 3, so I may just make a cut here, maybe like a Fate Foreseen, and running 3 Biting Gale. This can be really, really punishing for any of the aggro decks. It's even going to be punishing against something like Rhinar if they're going to be leaning more into like Blood or Spilla type things. You can normally shut down a lot of their turn doing that. Mostly there against like Fi, Briar, Vistarai, things like that. Oakenold is still here. It's mainly here if you have a very grindy mid-range sort of matchup where you actually do need to be presenting bigger threats. So for instance, you can still run it against Dash because you do need some kind of end game. You'll never fatigue Dash just because she pitches cards into her deck to use her item. So the issue is that if she's pitching cards to do damage, then she's like in the same category as you, where you're not burning cards to present damage. So you're never going to run out of threats, and you're never going to run out of cards. So you do actually need to win that matchup through combat damage. Oakenold's there for that. It can be there for Rhinar. You do need to be a little bit more proactive in a sense in that matchup, because being hyper defensive only gets you so far, because they can invalidate a lot of your blocking with the Intimidate mechanic. So you do kind of need some stuff for them. Also disrupting them is pretty good. I'm not exactly sure what other matchups bring it into. Oh, besides the mirror, obviously. So you bring it in for Bravo and you bring it in for Oldhim. You do need these cards to win. Sledge is also here. Still trying to experiment what matchups you want to bring it in for. I think it's pretty good into Rhinar. It's obviously good in the mirror. Although I think that you might want to be on Rampart for Bravo, just be able to deal with all of the dominate effects and being able to turn off the crush. And then Staunch Response is also here for the Guardian matchup, and anything else that might go tall, but I can't think of anything besides the Guardian, so unless that changes, it's just there for that. That's it. That's the deck. So mainly just trying to be as hyper defensive as possible. You're going to need to be very quick when you're playing this deck because it probably will go to time a lot. Although, as long as you understand the gameplay pattern of your deck, you're probably fine. But it's mainly here as passive fatigue, and then the biggest thing is that before this deck had Warhorn, you would just auto-concede to Dash, to Icelander, anything that had a good setup. But with the addition of Warhorn, you do have a way to stop Dash, arguably even better than the normal aggro Oldhim list. Well, normal as in what's currently the norm. So maybe even in a proactive Oldhim list, you're going to be running Warhorn anyway. This is a very good card against that deck. We'll see how good it is against Icelander. That's the main gist. So you're going to be just preserving life total until your opponent runs out of threats. You're always going to be prioritizing your Arsenal and Crown of Seeds. Crown of Seeds is going to be really important, so I would always try to keep a card of Arsenal, unless if you're just put in a spot where you have to block the last card. Probably wouldn't be trying to use Whale too often unless if you are naturally left with 2 cards in hand, or it's more efficient to be keeping the last card to pitch to use the Whale. Or if it's matchup dependent and you need to actually be dealing combat damage to your opponent. But that's the deck. So let me know what you think. If any of you decide to give it a shot, let me know how it goes in testing, because I'm still testing this deck myself, trying to see if it is, successful or not, or if this is just like a niche version of Oldhim and you should be on something more disruptive. It's just an idea to throw out there. I think Warhorn's really cool. So thank you for watching. See you next time.